I think retirement is a myth. I don't believe that we're meant to retire. Yeah, I think that we are made to work, not as drones, not as soulless drones, but as creators and stewards of what's been entrusted us. So, work is an important component of our lives and our self-esteem. I mean, the term work-life balance, I think, is just a horrible term, right? I mean, it isn't either or, right? I mean, work
Yes.
is your life. It is part of your life.
Welcome back to the Time Freedom Podcast, where you can learn how to rethink your work and your money to create a life you love right now. Join us for insights to help you find meaningful freedom so you can choose how and when and with whom you work for as long as you want. Here are your hosts, me, Brian Harriott, and Kirby Dennison. Today on the podcast, we welcome Tim Jenkins and Darran Littlefield. Tim and Darran co-founded consulting firm Point B in 1995 by asking a question the consulting industry wasn't ready for. What if a firm actually took its own people seriously? They walked away from the grind of traditional management consulting, built something from nothing, and grew it into a national firm of over 1,000 professionals before handing full ownership to the employees and stepping back. These days, they're in different zip codes. Tim splits his time between Leavenworth, Washington, and Park City, Utah, where he runs Colchuck, a private investment company. Darran relocated to Dallas to be closer to his family, but they still talk a couple of times a week and continue to work on projects together, which tells you everything you need to know about how they built Point B in the first place. Welcome back, everybody, to the Time Freedom Podcast. I'm really, really excited to have a tag team event today. We have Tim Jenkins and Darran Littlefield. So I worked for Tim and Darran so many years ago now, it seems, which is absolutely crazy. But at a very formative moment in my professional careers, a lot of what I take with me to this day, I learned when I was at Point B. So I'm really excited to have you guys here. Welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's great to be here, Brian. And Kirby, thanks for having us.
You're welcome. And one of the other things too, and I'd sent you this, there's this idea that sticks with me since I learned about it, 12, 15 years ago. There's this YouTube video by Drew Dudley. It's like one of the original YouTube videos. It's like bad quality and everything. And he talks about this, he calls it everyday leadership, but I think of it as there's these moments that you go through your life and you do these things and you have no idea the impact that they have on other people. And he talks about one in there that's really kind of cool, which is also very interesting because cystic fibrosis comes up in there. And my wife has cystic fibrosis. So I think that's why I probably latched onto that video. But I just wanted to say that both of you were one of those people for me. And the reason, another thing I always tell people is if you ever have those experiences, you have to tell the people that had that impact on you because it's a really good feeling to hear that. So I just wanted to let you guys know that you definitely did a lollipop moment for me.
I was going to say, you referred to the lollipop moment, and it is very gratifying that you sent that out, Brian. I really appreciate it. It was very kind.
And Brian, I have to say, I don't know what your followers think of you, but I can say it's all true. Brian is as great as he seems. We knew Brian back in the day, and he was down in our San Francisco office, and we would periodically travel down there to visit with the office. And seeing Brian was always a highlight.
Yeah.
He had an incredible attitude and just brought so much brightness and light to everyone. And just I really enjoyed spending time with you, Brian. Not just work wise, but just as a person, you were a lot of fun to hang out with.
Thank you. And I think what I realized is I think sometimes people try to have a work persona and a personal persona. I learned from the both of you, there's just kind of the person you are. And hopefully it's a good person.
Yeah.
And then that kind of just shines through. I'm going to get into some reminiscing Point B stories here soon with my example. But one of the questions, the question that we ask at the beginning of our episodes of our guests is something a little bit not on topic, but just for fun. What's something that few people know about you? And Kirby and I also share, and we're getting to the end of the season, so we're really scraping the bottom of the barrel here. But I've got some good ones, and hopefully you do too, Kirby. But Tim or Darran, do you want to take that question first?
I nominate Tim to go first.
Okay.
Sure. So I am a former football player, not a great one, but I coached football for a number of years. And when my girls started playing soccer, I was very much against this whole game of soccer, just the typical stereotypical football dad. I now am a huge soccer fan and guru. My girls got me into it, and it went well beyond that. Now I follow several teams. I'm getting up early on weekend mornings to watch and a
Yeah.
team in Wales that we actually have a small investment in. Not that team in Wales; it's their rival actually right now. So yeah, soccer's become a big thing, and not many people probably would know that or believe that. I never played soccer, so it's sort of a random hobby of mine.
That's so cool. I mean, I'm going to save mine, but I have something related to that too. Darran, do you want to go?
I have not dipped into the soccer world yet, but I am surprised, Tim, you didn't share your love for karaoke. You should at least tell us what your go-to song is.
I, I do love
That's what I
music.
should have done, is had you each other introduce
Yeah, no,
something
I was
about
thinking,
the other.
Tim, tell us your go-to song.
Oh, I don't know, maybe a little Chris Isaac, Wicked Game.
All
Oh,
right,
nice.
there you go.
That's good.
All right, well, I'll jump in. So, probably something that people don't know about me is I actually just got into this new canine sport. I have a dog, an Australian cattle dog, and it's called barn hunt. And not a lot of people know about it because it's a fairly new sport. But basically, they hide rats, fancy rats, right, in these plastic tubes and hide them amongst bales of hay. And then you turn your dog loose in these arenas. Look at Kirby's reaction. You turn these dogs loose in these arenas, and they go find these rats in these tubes. And it turns out my dog, it's like her superpower. She's really, really good at it. And we're not looking for world domination or anything like that, but it's a lot of fun. And in Texas, it's an indoor sport, which is fun when you're in the summer months. So there you go, barn hunt. Look it up. It's awesome.
And then when they find them, they don't like
No, they're
destroy
in
them.
tubes. They're protected.
Oh, they're in tubes.
Yeah, and the
Okay.
rats willingly go into the tubes. The rats actually really like the game too, which is kind of funny.
And in Texas, the rats are the size of rabbits too.
For real. Everything's bigger in Texas.
That's true.
Well, that's awesome. All right. So I'll just have a quick one about soccer. So again, I was not into soccer at all, never played soccer, but my son got into soccer and we took a trip to Europe, to England this summer and did the whole thing. And I've been on like now 5 tours of different stadiums, and he would play games against the local feeder teams. And so he played against, the name is escaping me, but one of the like Premier League teams, whatever, the academy teams. And the thing was, they got creamed, they got destroyed. And then we found out that they were also 3 years younger than our boys. But he played a game in Wales too. In Wales, we drove over to Wales, and those kids were actually kind of on par, and they had a really, really great game that they tied. It was pretty awesome.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I'll leave that at that. Go ahead, Kirby. You want to go?
Yeah, sure. I also don't know much about soccer. I've watched one game in my whole life, and Travis and I couldn't figure it out, so we gave up. But Darran's story reminds me of something that we do in Colorado, and I'm going to call it neck of the woods, I guess, is usually we have a lot of like fundraisers and things like that for, whatever. And we do mouse races. So you bet on mice and you put them in like runs, and then you just pray that your mouse wins.
That sounds awesome. If it was being chased by my cattle dogs, you would win.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like they do Cajun boils with it, and like it's a big meal and feast and all of
Are
it.
people just bored and they have to come up with these strange things to do?
Probably.
Watching
For sure.
Tom
I
and
mean-
Jerry.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
Tom and Jerry, totally.
I want to finish first place at something, so I'm going to invent this really obscure thing that I can be good at. I don't know. All right. Well, that's awesome. So before we dive in, can you just give us, each of you, just some quick personal and professional demographics on what you're doing right now? And then at the end, I was just wondering, I don't think I know this, like how you guys met.
All right. Well, my job now is to try to keep Darran busy. So believe it or not, we even though we went into partnership 30 plus years ago, we still talk to each other multiple times a week. And
That's cool. Oh, that's great.
we're not formally in a partnership, but we still work together. And what's even more fun is our kids now work together. My daughter works with me, and his son works with him. And so we're on calls together all the time. And so it's really fun. So what I'm doing is I stepped away from the day-to-day at Point B. I got into investing. And we essentially run a multi-asset class investment fund that invests in real estate, private equity, venture capital, asset-backed loans, things of that nature. And we invest with the idea of helping to improve lives at scale. And so the investing has a purpose to it. It's not to enrich ourselves. As a matter of fact, when we make profits, we just plow it right back into our investment fund. And but it's super fun. We invest all over the world, including a Welsh soccer team, and across all kinds of different companies and people. And Darran and his family oftentimes invest alongside of us. So that's kind of how we're able to have an excuse to keep working with each other.
I love that. I'll just interject real quick. Like I feel like as you go on through your career, when money becomes less important, it's more about like designing this work so that you can be around people you like.
Mm.
And that's so cool to hear that.
For sure. So I can actually answer how I met Tim. So
Yeah.
I'll fast forward past college and everything. But I when I left Accenture, I worked for a small healthcare consultancy in the Bay Area. And Tim's wife, Christy, joined the company. I worked, 7 days a week. Sometimes I felt like with Christy. And it was a great firm. And then Tim and Christy moved back up to Seattle. And Tim called me up and said, "Hey, Darran, any interest in coming and doing a independent contractor gig up in Seattle?" And we had kind of like, oh, the Bay Area is getting expensive. We thought, well, let's give it a shot. Well, at least to be a fun weekend away, right? So for your viewers and Brian, Seattle, who've been to Seattle, it's that weekend in February, right? Where it's 65 degrees in Seattle. There's not a cloud in the sky. Tim's driving us across the 520 floating bridge. There's the Cascades on one side, the Olympics on the other. And I just look at my wife and I said, why doesn't everybody live here? This is amazing. And then, so we went and looked at houses and literally within 10 days, we bought a house, sold a house, quit a job, took a job. And then we had to tell our parents we were leaving the Bay Area. So that was a little bit rough, but that's how we met. And then what I'm doing now is Tim actually covered a little bit of that. I probably would say I'm a little bit in a transition. We just moved to Dallas area about a couple of years ago, and we're still kind of getting our footing in this new kind of community and figuring out our time with our grandson and all that kind of good stuff. Your book hit me at a pretty good time in terms of just the transition and the seasons of life. So Tim's been a big help in terms of providing me continue to anchor in some things, and then but also looking to do some more volunteer stuff. I've done a ton of volunteer stuff along the way. I'm still looking to do some of that too.
That's awesome. Can you take us back? A lot of the listeners and viewers here are considering going out on their own or at the very early stages. And I know that like your story has the whole evolution. So I want to, if I can, point back to that origination time period. So you got into it a little bit, it sounded like. Do you want to take a job up in Seattle? But how did it all start? Like, what's the evolution? And what were your like goals from the beginning? Did you plan to grow a big consulting firm?
I think that I could probably start this, Darran. You can fill in here.
Yeah.
We'll take you back to what management consulting was like in the, let's say, 70s, 80s. We started in the 80s. It was very difficult to have a life back then and be a management consultant. It was something you did for a short number of years and you got out of it as soon as you could. The folks that stayed in it, and hopefully I'm not insulting anyone, they're probably all retired now, but there was a lot of divorces among the partners. You would oftentimes hear really talented people say, man, I like the consulting work, but I can't do this lifestyle. I don't want to be like one of those partners. I don't want a life like that. And I personally had seen my dad work a lot of hours. He was not a management consultant. He was a surgeon, a trauma surgeon, but he worked a ton of hours and he missed a lot of my childhood and I did not want to do that. And so I thought, I need to find a profession that is more conducive to having a family. So I left consulting briefly and went to a client and immediately thought, I can't do this. I can't do budgets. I don't want to have, these people working for me on a regular basis. I missed the variety of consulting. And so I had seen what the smaller firm that Darran and my wife had been working at the Bay Area. And I was really inspired by that. And that firm is still in existence, by the way. Congratulations, Dava, and on a long career. But I thought, we could do that up in Seattle. And so that was my thought was I had reached out to several friends in my who I really respected in the consulting world. There was 5 of them, 3 in Seattle and 2 of my San Francisco Accenture friends, one of whom was Darran. And the 3 in Seattle all turned me down, thought I was crazy. They wouldn't do it. Now, 2 of them later came to work for us, which was kind of funny, but they missed out being founders. So Darran and our other partner, Jim, both responded. I said, look, I can set you up with an independent consulting gig. This will give us the baseline to kind of get started, buy us some time. And that's what they did. As Darran said, they came up literally almost within a couple of weeks, and we were off to the races. Darran, how would you fill in the blank?
Yeah, I think Tim answered. I think it was Tim and I used to do orientations together, and it was a lot of fun. Tim used to say we kind of wanted to have our cake and eat it too, which was very true. There was a lot we love about consulting. We love the variety. We love the different people we worked with. We love the challenges, the mental horsepower that we were around. It's really a great profession, but it comes along with long hours and overtime. At least it used to, or long hours and travel. So I think we kind of evolved into it, and then we realized it was a lot of there was a lot of people that were really excited and interested in what we were doing. As Tim mentioned, the people that he originally asked kind of saw us doing what we were doing and ended up coming over. But it Point B became kind of a destination place for, kind of the late 20s, early 30s people that were kind of in the midst of their, kind of their consulting career, that loved it, but wanted to go home to their own house in their own backyard at night instead of be on the road. So that's kind of how it evolved.
That's exactly my situation. When I reflect back on that, you take your first job out of college and you're just trying to get a job. And I joined Point B, by choice. Well, by your choice and my choice. But my choice is when I realized that was the first time also that I realized that different companies had different cultures. I mean, it sounds kind of dumb now, but obviously that's the case, but I didn't really realize it. And meeting people who worked at Point B and going, oh, I like that person. I like that person too. There's some sort of thing about them. I don't know, or how they approach work. I'm like, I just want to be surrounded by that. And then I came on, and then I realized that there was just this huge investment in culture. Now, when I joined, it was, many, many years later. I think San Francisco was only 3 people big at the time, but Seattle was a good size. I just have a question about culture, because whenever I think of company culture now, it immediately goes back to Point B. And it's what I take. That's ultimately what I've taken with me from there. How did that come about? Like, was that always there? Did that kind of evolve? I'm just curious.
I want to admit that when we started the firm, it was really about creating a place for the 3 of us to do what we wanted to do. But it was really hard to then start bringing on employees and not give them the same benefit. And so then it became, well, it's a place where we all get to do what we want to do. But there's some things we had to do differently in order to make that happen. And I'm sure we'll get into that. But one of the things we understood right off the bat was that culture is not just something that you let happen. Your company's going to have a culture whether you want it to have one or not. The question is how much you can shape it. And so we very much believed we had a systems thinking approach. So we thought of culture as a system. So how are we going to develop culture systematically almost from the get-go? And some of our earliest employees would tell you that we were very systematic. We had certain types of events and meetings and such that we did. The thing that was really weird about us is we started in 1995. We did not have an office. And we didn't have an office. I think we finally got our office about 14 years later. That was the first time we had an office. And we were pretty big by the time we got an office. But this doesn't sound so radical now, but believe me, in 1995, very radical. As a matter of fact, we had clients that actually wouldn't hire us because they didn't think we were a real firm. In air quotes.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, because we didn't have an office. But we were like, hey, with the technology, with Windows 95 running on laptops, sounds kind of quaint, but I mean, this was pretty radical technology that allowed you to be mobile. Even though Wi-Fi wasn't really ubiquitous, we figured out a way to allow people to work from the client and or from coffee shops or wherever. We hacked into Starbucks fax machines to upload emails, did all sorts of crazy stuff. But as a result, we were very lean in terms of our operating costs. And so we were also very profitable. And so we poured a lot of those profits right back into the things that brought people together, even without an office. And so we probably had far more culture and far more team building going on in our company without an office than companies that did have an office.
Yeah, very true. We actually had a culture director role, Brian. You probably remember that. We eventually had one in each office.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other interesting thing about that is it kind of evolved, for the first, maybe Tim, 8 to 9 years, it was all kind of passed down through tribal knowledge, right? It's like, oh, we've got this great culture, but nobody really knew where to go look it up or find it because it wasn't written down. We, Tim and I, took time, maybe over 6 to 9 months, and wrote up our culture tenets. And it was kind of funny. In prepping for this, I went back and looked at them, and I wanted to read just the first few to you guys. This was back in 1995 in consulting. Brian, I'm sure you've read these, but
I remember being at a dinner across from where the Giants play, and we were going through it. I remember there were like about 500 of them.
We have a lot. But it's funny because we said we don't want to constrict ourselves and be like, succinct, right? We want to put them all out there.
It was
yeah.
It just, you'd read them and you get the gestalt of our culture. It was not, there was not any one of them that was key, but taken all together, they really represented our culture.
But
I would love to hear them.
The first few I think were really great. And this is the very first category, on our culture tenets. We had leadership tenets after that, but our culture tenets went like this. The very first category was passion for life, right? So this is Brian, this is like your book just kind of blew up in my brain as I was reading our culture tenets. The very first one was, we have goals and aspirations that surpass what we can accomplish at work. The second one is, we wrap point B around the rest of our life, not vice versa. The third one is, we have flexibility and choice in the assignments we take on, right? Which was not true in the consulting world. They just, you went where you went. The fourth one, I put it in here just because I think it was kind of funny. We always, and Tim said a little bit, we like to work smart, not hard. But Tim would always finish that with, washing machines work hard. It was always kind of a fun thing to do. It kind of reminded me, like, yeah, we really do need to work smart in order to work towards our own time freedom, which we didn't call it at the time, but that's really what we were trying to work towards. And the one thing I'd chat about, and Tim, maybe you want to riff on this a little bit, but I think key to our culture was we had this pay it forward kind of mentality, right? We had a thing called the knowledge request system. That was super powerful. It didn't work, when you're at the Big Four and you were getting ready to go on a project that you didn't know anything about. It was Friday, and you didn't know who to call, and nobody would call you back. At point B, you'd get tons of people helping you out. It was just a different mentality. So, Tim, I don't know if you have anything else you want to say, but the pay it forward culture was really key to our success.
Yeah. The funny thing is, I've worked with a couple of services firms since Point B. I've sat on the board of one of them, and still are on the board. And it's funny to me to see how much their human nature is the same across companies. And this is a wonderful company with a wonderful culture as well. But there's always this worry among the people, like when we go to the other offices, and this is true back at Point B, there's always this question we would get, like, well, what happens to our culture when we grow? Like, what if when we're X number of people, will the culture still be the same? And I always would say, it's great to have people that care about that. It means that you really like the culture now. And so there's a sense of, I don't want to lose this wonderful thing we have. And so I would tell them that the great news is culture is infinitely scalable if you think of culture like a bank. And if everyone is making deposits, and then generally we're going to have a surplus of great culture. But if everyone looks to it just to make withdrawals, the culture is going to wane away. Now, sometimes you need to make a culture withdrawal. Like sometimes you need to be supported. Maybe you can't work as hard. Maybe you've had something happen in your personal life where you've got to work less or whatever. And so you need the firm to pick you up. And that's what we did. So, but the point was that you made culture deposits. And that's things like when a new person comes in, you make them feel incredibly welcome. But you're essentially constantly investing in the culture. And at that point, there's no limit to it. It's not reliant upon the CEO or some key person or some methodology. It's really about everyone believing in it and making those investments day in and day out.
Yeah, I mean, just all of the things that you're saying about, because you're profitable, you could invest back into having connection established. I remember because when we started San Francisco, Kayla had come down, Bob Colleran was there, and Bob Colleran was our culture director. And he basically said that very much. He's like, if we get together and do things as colleagues, then we can just go spend your money.
Yeah.
And my wife and I are from the Midwest. We were raised, not fancy, but we ended up doing some pretty cool things just because we were in San Francisco. We went to dinner at Fairlawn with Bob, and then we went to Avenue Q. And I just remember at the end of the night looking at my wife, I'm like, man, we just struck gold here. I don't like, this is great. But in terms of like impressing someone right off the bat, knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, we used to have a rule that if the 2 Point Bers got together, they was on the company. And so we would always pay. And again, that was a culture system. It was a deliberate investment in culture and no one abused it, but it was very much, you love the fact that, if you and I are getting together, we're going to be building that culture together, right? We're going to build those bonds that keep us at the firm.
I got to tell you one more anecdote of something I remember. And I don't know, Darran, if you were there, but Tim, you were definitely there because we got together the San Francisco market. It was at some steak restaurant in downtown. And I remember there were a bunch of people there, and you ordered a bottle of wine that, to me, it was like $300 or something, which is probably
I wasn't there.
It's probably what wine costs
like, I'm
now.
Yeah.
But at the time I was thinking, oh my God, $300 bottle of wine. The thing is, do you remember this? They brought it, they uncorked it.
Yeah.
They uncorked it and it was bad. But I just remember you going, wait, I can't, like you were like having an internal struggle about asking them to take back the $300 bottle of wine that didn't work. And I thought it was funny at the time, but now as I reflect on it over the years, I'm like, that's the type of person that I like to work for. Someone that's like, I can't do this. This is not how it's supposed to happen.
Well, the nuance of that story was we had rented a private room at a restaurant and we had a minimum. The server waited until literally we were finishing dessert and people were ready to go home on a weeknight and came up and whispered in my ear and said, "Sir, you're substantially below your minimum." I'm like, "Well, now you tell me." So I said, "How much?" And he said $500. And this was, 20 years ago. And I said, "Well, bring me the wine list." So he brings me the wine list. I just go by price. I'm like, "Oh, $500." And it was a bottle of Silver Oaks, like 20-year-old Silver Oak, which is a fantastic wine. But I'd never had a bottle of wine that old or that expensive. And wine at that age tends to get thinner, but more nuanced. Well, I didn't know that. I'm expecting this big, powerful Silver Oak. So when he pours this thing, I'm like, I was sort of underwhelmed. It was not what I was expecting. He could see it and he was wondering what's going on. You guys are all looking at me.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was funny, but I just want to point out, I was not spending the company's money willy-nilly. It was going to get spent anyway. So I figured I'd treat you guys to the $500 bottle of wine.
Funny. Hey, Tim, if I want to pull it back because Brian, you've had so many great guests on your podcast with some really touching stories. It kind of made me think about. I want to give Tim a prop here real quick, but when you get those odd phone calls on your phone, you're like, something's not good. So that was kind of the headline. I was my dad was in ill health and having issues, and I kind of figured I was going to get that call any day. And I was in a boardroom with Tim and Jim, our business partners, and it was my sister calling. So I'm like, oh shoot, I knew something was up, right? And it wasn't my dad, it was my mom who ended up having a kind of a fatal aneurysm. I'll never forget leaving that boardroom and flying to California. I checked out for 3 weeks. I don't think I even looked at email or anything. And hats off. I mean, Tim and I were co-CEOs, and he just picked up everything, sent the email out to everybody, 500-600 people at the time. Call me, don't call Darran. I don't think I had maybe but 45 emails in 3 weeks. It was amazing. So that was my withdrawal from point B, from the culture. So it works. And I think the team aspect of that works a lot. We'll talk about probably a little bit later, but the time freedom folks really applaud those that are doing it on their own because it's hard, but doing it with a team can be very helpful and rewarding as well.
And Darran, you picked me up. I won't go to I had a family emergency some years later, and you picked me up during that emergency and was able to return the favor. Darran and I mean, we're co-CEOs. That arrangement doesn't often work, but it worked with us just because we had worked together so long. And to this day, I feel like I always tell people, well, Darran's essentially family. I mean, we really are family at this point.
Can you go into that a little bit more? Because I know I've had a personal experience with a partnership that hasn't worked. So not only did you start it with partners and then you were co-CEOs, it's like doubling down on it. Like other than just, I really like this person. I don't know. Is there any other trick to that?
I think we kind of fell into it. I don't know if we really thought this all through. I mean, we certainly all liked each other. So that was nice. But I assume most partnerships end up or start out with the people liking each other. But in our case, it just so happened that all three of us had very different skill sets and complementary to one another, which is fantastic. The other thing I've told people is that I don't know what it would like to be. I mean, I could probably be in a partnership now with Darran because I know him so well, but coming into it, having three people is better because if it had been any two of us, we would have had tug of wars all the time. But with three people, there's sort of this tension. There's always sort of that third person to kind of break the tie or moderate or whatever. And I think we benefited from having that 3-person tension. I mean, later on, Darran and I were able to just work it through. And I will say there was some conflict at the beginning. I mean, there's definitely some tough discussions and some times where I thought, should I just bail out of this thing? But we all made a resolution that we were in it, come hell or high water, for 5 years. And we stuck to that. And I think it was almost like the idea of marriage. Like if you go into marriage thinking, well, I can always bail out through divorce, you're probably going to get divorced. But I think if you go into it saying divorce is not an option, you got to work stuff through. And that's the way we saw it. We were definitely going to work it through. And we did. And in the latter years, it was just not much tension at all. Even though we were dealing with tough stuff, we were always seemed to be on the same page. The other thing is we always made decisions behind closed doors. We could hash things out. We could yell at each other. But when we came out of that room, we were all unified. There was no dissent.
Yeah. I think we also worked through, I think some of the harder things we had to work through really was the balance of workload. right? I mean, we had Jim, who we love dearly, ended up probably just having his time freedom a little bit sooner than we did, maybe. But phenomenal business partner, but I think we worked it out where it's like, well, let's figure out a way to take a salary for the work that we're doing and do other things. So even though we had some really tough things that we had to deal with, I think the three of us were, as Tim said, we're really committed to making it work, and that helped. That helped a lot.
I love that. So your situation's a little bit unique, but I think so. You grew the large company, found financial freedom, and then found time freedom. That's all good. The question I have is around you've been living with time freedom, but time freedom means different things to different people. I'm kind of curious for each of you, like what your perspective on that is.
Can I back up though, Brian? I feel you made the point. Well, we got financial freedom. I wouldn't say it. I mean, we formed the firm to have time freedom.
Yeah, I would agree.
Oh, that's a really good
So
point.
I think that we would say we got time freedom when we formed the firm.
Yeah.
Just in preparation for this, I started thinking about, what are some of the aspects that allowed us to sort of have that time freedom? And part of it was, again, I mentioned this earlier, we had to change the rules of the game. And so the first thing we already talked about this idea of working smart, not hard. And, without getting into all the sort of consulting industry stuff, that meant pricing to value and not to time. And so early on, that's how we did it. So if you could get something done really fast with a few hours and still make profit out of it, so much the better. So that was an important thing. We kind of lost that later, but that's what we did up front. The other thing is we focused on a skill, which back then we called it project management, morphed into project leadership later on, et cetera. But that was a skill that everyone needed in the mid 90s. And believe it or not, you could walk into companies in the mid 90s and there was no one who called a project manager. I mean, it's a ubiquitous title today, but it wasn't back then. And so bringing people in who knew how to manage projects was kind of a luxury. Nobody knew how to do that. And everyone had a project due because that was when they were rolling out PCs and to desktops and everything was changing. So we picked a skill that didn't require people to travel. Like if you're an aerospace expert, there's only certain places where maybe your clients are going to be. But in our case, everyone in the city needed this. So we could reliably tell people, we're going to basically keep you closer to home. The other thing is we also allowed people to time shift. We didn't dictate an 8 to 5 schedule at all. I mean, we said it's really about what your client dictates. But if you can still tell your client, hey, I got another client to work on over here, we don't care if you're not there. we don't care. I mean, I used to play basketball 2 hours a day, most days of the week, and right in the middle of the day. And that was something that I would have felt guilty doing before, or I was playing hooky. But at point B, that was just part of it. That kept me sane. And so I would make a point to tell our folks, hey, I'm playing basketball. If you call it like noon, I'm not going to be around. I'm going to be, playing hoops. Hopefully you'll be doing the same kind of things. And so we kind of didn't dictate when people had to work. And again, this sounds normal now, but it wasn't normal back then. So we had to change that, the rules. I guess to end this thing, we were one of the first remote work companies. I mean, I'm kind of bummed that when COVID happened, Point B wasn't on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, like, here's how to make this work. Because at that point, the firm had been doing it for 25 years. But we made it work from the get-go. And so people had the flexibility of working from wherever. And that was a real game changer as well. So all these things allowed us to time shift. And I mean, Darran was a high school baseball coach. I was a football coach for 10 years. I also coached Little League. We both coached Little League. I started an AAU basketball team for one of my daughters for a couple of years and was the general manager of that. We were doing all of this while we were running this firm. And that was our goal from the get-go. We formed the firm so we could do that kind of stuff.
In 2007, I remember it was always said, oh, you can take time away from the firm. You just have to do it. But at least in San Francisco, nobody had done it. And Claire and I were like, well, we just bought this cabin and we want to gut it. So we're going to take 2 months off. And we just did it. And I remember like people like Leona Barnett, and I don't even remember she's like, I can't believe he's doing it. He's really doing it. And then she did it later. And like, no, it goes back to culture and things. You can just say it, but it's another thing to actually do it and see it done.
Yeah. One of our executives worked from an island every summer in the Midwest in one of the Great Lakes, So he had some sort of remote setup back that he'd hacked some sort of thing on a pole. I don't know, to get to dial in. We were all a little jealous of him. He took it to an extreme, but hey, it worked.
Yeah. But it definitely didn't come without sales challenges too, though. I mean, the good news, we also had incredibly highly talented people, right? So when you walk into a sales meeting and say, hey, yes, the client would say, I absolutely would love to have this person. I've got her, she's amazing. And you say, well, She worked from 9 to 2:30 and take summers off. So we got to finish the project before June. And it was just like, that's okay. I mean, our clients bought into our culture as much as our people did and loved it. So that was also a big plus too.
I was telling my youngest daughter the other day that one of the we also had to find talent in different places because especially up front, we were not a known commodity and we were trying to pick off top talent. And we realized that some of the top firms were causing young moms to leave because they couldn't go have a baby and still work at the firm. It just wasn't done back then. You had to be all in or all out. And I'm thinking, okay, so all this talent is sort of being pushed out of these firms. We have the model that can accommodate that. So we started hiring women that had recently had kids or were going to have kids, and we had a way to pull them in part-time, whatever they wanted to work. We could allow them to work around their schedule, and it worked. And we had a lot of our early employees were moms that were like, hey, I finally found something that works for me. And you can imagine those folks became hugely loyal to the firm because it was the model that allowed them to have the life they wanted to have.
Is it true that, like, this is a story that I tell, you'll have to tell me if this is actually true, but somebody told me once at Point B that company's goal was to be loved by the spouse or the partner of the employee. That was the goal.
Yeah.
Because if that was the case, then that person will stick around forever.
That's very true. In fact, I'll give Tim
Really?
credit for the starting of the annual getaway, but in a large part that was to honor the significant other for their sacrifice that they were allowing their partner to make at our firm. And even at when we would have watering holes, the shtick was you'd always bring dessert home since you're out late at night, you'd always bring dessert home from the restaurant to your significant other. So we always felt like and it wasn't disingenuous at all. I mean, we'd stand up in front of the getaways with 1,000 people and thank the significant others, and it was huge, and it was very heartfelt because we had our own significant others and wives that we appreciated as well.
The other thing we would do, again, this is the idea of culture, systematic culture. When we would have a getaway, there was inevitably some rooms were better than others, and we would make sure that the newest people got the best rooms. There's stories of people showing up and they're young and they're starting out, they think they're a peon in the firm, and they come in and get a suite. And they're like, what happened? Is this a mistake? Someone would say there's some mistake. And we're like, no, this is, we're so excited you're here. But again, it just set an example, and they knew, okay, now my job is to make other people feel as welcomed as I felt. Right.
That one stuck with me so much. It's in the book. That
I was going to
particular
say,
anecdote.
That's right.
yeah, Brian's mentioned that before. I just want to go back to like the new mom thing, because when I started having kids, I was in corporate at a financial institution. And I mean, my daughter was born in 2018, and it was very much still the same. Like, you can't move up now you have kids. You can't commit to this job title because you're a mom. And that was like my driving factor for everything that I've done to this point. And so that's what I love about, it's why I went out actually on my own and started my own business. And what I've loved about working with Brian is that he's brought that culture here. So it's just easy.
That's great.
Continue.
Yeah. So apart from like the time freedom work, like what allows me to pursue this is because I still have people that work. I have a team of like, four? I think they're four. Yeah, 4 or 5. Very small. Lee Hansen's one of them, who still work for me, at Kaiser Permanente. It's super flex. It's all of the values of early Point B. That's basically how I'll explain the culture. And then somebody who maybe hasn't worked at Point B, but I worked with them at Accenture beforehand, then I get to go through all the stuff, like what that means, which is just really incredible. Are there firms that are out there anymore that do this kind of pro-employee perspective? Like,
I think we had an influence in the industry. Slalom, it was a firm that basically started with its eye on Point B. They started about 7 years after we did. I think they would probably admit that they borrowed a lot of things that had been successful for us. They have done an amazing job. They've grown that firm to be a multi-billion-dollar firm now. But as far as I hear, they have the same kind of cultural dynamic and treat their folks quite well. I mean, the industry it's a tough industry right now. It's going through a lot of change, as most
Yeah.
industries are, but the consulting firms seem to find a way. They always seem to find a way to adapt. And I think that's what they're all doing right now. But it is hard. I know there's some layoffs in the industry, and Darren and I faced the layoff issue a few times, and that was one of our tougher things, especially the great financial crisis. If your purpose is to take care of your people and you're faced with a layoff, in one case, we did actually make a decision to basically use all the cash we had left in order to not lay off people. And it took us right to the brink. I would say that. But we had to, we had to put our money where our mouth is, literally.
Yeah, we didn't do layoffs for our tenure, which is good. But we also stopped taking salaries in 2008, 2009 as well. So to figure out how to make it happen. But
Yeah.
those were tough times, but I think it also built a lot of loyalty as well, right? Back to your other point, though, there's more than a few ex-Point Bers that have started their own firms. There's one in Colorado, there's one in Seattle, so there's more than a few kind of
Portland.
look-alike firms that I think are still doing really well.
Yeah,
I think
the
that's great.
diaspora is all over the place. I just saw one of my favorite folks who I work with. I'm actually going to talk to later this afternoon. I just saw she started as an executive role at a firm out of Chicago. So it's fun to see them continue to move on, and that culture will go to the next firm.
So I just want to ask a general question, for listeners who are interested in time freedom and have to keep working, given your experience going way back, like understanding this model a long time ago, before it had a name. Give me some, just give me your best stuff. That's all.
I'd love to talk. I mean, Darren and I have actually, you gave us another excuse to hang out with each other. We've talked a bunch on the phone, and we've been talking. Obviously, we're a little nearer to what some people might consider retirement age. But I know, Brian, in your book, you agree with us that I think retirement is a myth. I don't believe that we're meant to retire. Yeah, I think that we are made to work, not as drones, not as soulless drones, but as creators and stewards of what's been entrusted us. So, work is an important component of our lives and our self-esteem. I mean, the term work-life balance, I think, is just a horrible term, right? I mean, it isn't either or, right? I mean, work is your life. It is part of your life. It's a component, right? And so I think when you have that mindset, blurring the lines between work and life is not a bad thing. But as a result, one of the reasons I was able to do all that coaching and spend all that time with my kids and stuff like that during the week was I would often work on the weekends. And that sounds really horrible, but that's just how I made up for it. I didn't care. Or a lot of times I'd vacation with people I worked with. I mean, it was like, I blurred the lines quite a bit. So, and even as I was able, we had sort of financial independence because of Point B, it never occurred to me that I would then just sit around and clip coupons and sit on a beach and the whole idea. I mean, it's just never going to happen. I think really what you do is you just shift careers. You shift, and the new career will capitalize on the skills and abilities you developed in the previous career. And oftentimes the financial capital you amassed becomes the investment capital for this next career. Could be starting up another company. It could be, in my case, I'm using it as an investment fund, but that's how you do it. So you're just constantly funding whatever the next thing is. And I will work until I keel over. I mean, or if I lose my ability to think. I mean, it is not because I'm a workaholic. I just really enjoy what I do. Today's work was made possible by Point B. Point B's work was made possible by the work I did at Accenture. And so each one of them built on the other, but each one provided me with the capital to move on. So, at first, when you're early in your career, you have a lot of time capital and very little financial capital. And over time, that balance shifts. And when you get late in your career, you have usually a lot of financial capital and your time capital is far more limited. So it's just really an investment allocation decision, all the way through. And so we invested a lot of time capital in Point B up front because we had it. We didn't have any financial capital. We started the firm with $200. It was supposed to be $300. Each one was supposed to put in $100. I never put my $100 in. I point out as an investor, I had an infinite return on my financial investment. So, Darren and Jim did pretty well with their $100, but I didn't.
We never let them live that down. Brian, I'll add two things I think I really liked from your book. I think I took away, one of which is I think time freedom can look different for different people, right? The one thing I think, as Tim mentioned, is that, we loved work. We loved what we did. We loved the people we worked with. We blurred the lines. I coached baseball. People were like, "Oh, it's amazing you can coach baseball," but I still worked till midnight, right? But that was my choice and I loved doing it. And that was my time freedom. right? So that was one thing, and it can look different. I mean, maybe for some people it's, make $1 million and sit on the beach and call it good, right? But for us, I think it just looked different. And then I think too, for us, it's interesting we talk about vocational freedom. I'd be willing to bet we never really put a work on the board, but I'd be willing to bet we probably hit vocational freedom about 40 is my guess, Tim. But I don't think we acknowledged it. We didn't think about it. It's like, well, what are we going to do? We're like, we love this firm. We're going to keep going, right? And that's kind of what we did. So I think the seasons of life that we went through. Now we're the oldest guests on your podcast, so we can actually hopefully share some of that. But the seasons of life that we went through helped us realize that there's probably different definitions of time freedom based on where you're at in your season of life. Right now, I love the time freedom I have. If I look back on then, I felt like I was blessed and didn't know it, what I had, right? So I think I love your book because it calls out the whole purpose of time freedom, which I think we did, but we didn't call it that. We didn't recognize it, but we loved it and we lived it.
I'm just going to point out, you're not the oldest ones on our podcast.
Wow.
There's some
Just
to come.
the oldest that's been released up to this point.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
So you can consider yourselves very young.
Well, I just want to point out, Darran is older than I am, so he is.
That is true. That is way much older, much older.
Yeah, a couple of things I wanted to say to folks is that when you make a career transition, if you think that you're going to leave a role and you have the ability to not have to work for a little bit, don't rush that transition. I've talked to a lot of folks that, especially kind of hard chargers, like they want to get on to the next thing. The problem is, you're not going to make a good decision, and you need to have a little time to essentially step away, to network, to learn, to basically forget what you knew, forget a little bit about the last role and how you left and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's an important step. I know that I started jumping into nonprofit work right off the bat, and that was kind of a mistake. I realized I don't like nonprofit work that much. I mean, I'll do it here and there, but that was not really what I wanted to do. And so it took me a while to disentangle myself from some of the things that I jumped into too quickly. So that's one thing I think is important. But you're never going to stay in the same job forever. So you're going to have, everything you do is going to have an S curve. You start out on a learning curve, you ramp up, and who knows how long it takes, but eventually you're going to top out. And so you're going to make transitions, and not just in within a job, but within a career. And so that's what I've seen is that you got to think of your career in maybe 10, 15, 20-year increments and think, you're probably going to have, given the lifespan that we have right now, I mean, you're going to have at least a couple of careers. And so you need to think about those transitions. And so really the finances are really just a means to an end. They're just a mechanism that allows you to kind of make those transitions. It's essentially investment capital.
Any other thoughts on kind of reflection on your journeys?
I'll just anchor back to this. Kind of funny, Brian, but I loved your stories in your book. I think you did a great job pulling in some of the personal aspects. My favorite quote in your entire book, and I read all 296 pages, however much it is, was from Grandpa Kenny, right?
Oh,
and
yes.
Grandpa Kenny, you probably remember this quote, and it just hit me because let me add a backdrop for Grandpa Kenny. So I was working literally full time on the transaction for Point B with our CEO and a team. Tim, I think, had started his transition, but he was definitely engaged, right? But I was working full time on the transaction, and we sold the firm on January 14th, 2022. And went out to dinner. And then Monday I woke up and was like, what do I do now? Right. I mean, it was literally just like I fell off a cliff. And right about March, because Tim was right. It was really good to decompress. But right about March, I had this moment where your Grandpa Kenny totally codified my feeling. And he said, Brian, I was so bored, I started rotating the wheels on my vacuum cleaner. How great is that quote? I'm like, I wish I would have coined that, but that's kind of what it felt like. And I think to Tim's point, you do need that time, but you also need to make sure that you're continuing to put the guardrails in place and get the friends and rely on your faith and everything else to kind of make sure you're pushing forward and doing it in a very productive, positive fashion.
Yeah, and I had Darran said 2022, but really was when we stepped away from the CEO role in 2011. We sold the company 100% to our employees through an ESOP in 2014, and so really around 2011, 2014 is when I started my transition. So I'd already was some years into my new career by the time. So Darran was really 2022 when he really stepped away. So I mean, I was 8 or a lot of years ahead of him. So it was kind of fun though, because I've been able to pull him in, pull him alongside me. One thing I will say, just kind of maybe a good closing thought, is that the test is not what you get out of life. The test is, what did you put into it? Right. And I found his quote from George Bernard Shaw, who said, "I'm of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community. And so long as I live it, it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live." And I know that's kind of countercultural, but I truly believe that when you eventually transition into the work that, like, I'm doing now, it's not work. I mean, this is life-giving to me and hopefully to others. And, your influence just continues on. And I think the idea, if you're going to, I might piss a bunch of people off here, but if you choose to retire in the classic sense, you're essentially choosing to work at not being bored, what Darren was just getting at, right?
Right.
We're designed to be in community and to add to that community in some way. And you could call that work, but it's inherently other-centered. But if your focus is on me time, then that's the opposite of other-centered. In fact, the opposite of other-centered is self-centered. So I'll kind of leave it at that.
I'm so lucky to have been part of the Point B story and have been influenced by you both. So I just want to thank you so much for that. And thanks so much for coming on. Thanks so much for giving Grandpa Kenny his props, because he's a great guy. And yeah, this has just been wonderful. If people want to connect with you, what's the best way?
For me, it's by
Smoke
LinkedIn.
signals?
With smoke
Like
signals.
smoke
Yeah,
signals.
Yeah.
We'll be-
Yeah. Smoke signals are-
Darren's kind of old school.
I'm old school. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Either that or rotary phone. LinkedIn's good. It's just make sure it's Darran with 2 A's and 2 R's. Otherwise, you won't find me.
Nice.
Same thing. LinkedIn's pretty much the only social platform I'm on, but I am pretty active in LinkedIn. And so people are welcome to follow me there and reach out.
I thought I saw you on TikTok, but maybe that was a different Tim.
That's a different Tim Jenkins for sure.
Well, thank you guys so much for being on.
Yeah. Kirby and Brian, thank you guys. You guys rock.
All right. What a great conversation with Tim and Darran. It was interesting for me just to see a glimpse of your past, which was cool. And what molded you. Brian, what was your takeaways?
Yeah. So I worked there for 6 years. I think when I was around 30 to 36. So yeah, it was very formative years. The thing I loved about Point B then, and that I'm glad we talked a lot about, is how a company has company culture and what goes into it, and how company culture is like a bank. And when you make deposits, you can get big and it can still exist. All the talk about company culture, I think it was just like a masterclass in company culture. And I don't know if companies these days have that same investment in their employees. I don't know if the dynamic of business has changed. I think you can have that when you have very tiny businesses, and that's why I'm so passionate about them. Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, I think that is a great point. And I think working at 2 different corporate settings, well, 3 technically, I think it was easier at the local level to have some of that buy-in, and because you see them and you work with them every day. What I loved is that it was so from top to bottom for them. They built it so that they could live the life that they wanted. And then they were like, oh, I guess we have to do that for everyone, and not just like, oh, I'm going to do this, but you need to work. I loved that they carried that forward. And the other thing that they said something about paying it forward. And you hear that a lot in other things. Like you hear like the coffee shop, pay it forward, or like do a good deed, pay it forward type stuff. But never in a workplace have I heard of that. And I loved that, the whole concept of it.
Yeah. And it was just little things that would happen that would combine to reinforce that message. The last thing that I would say is I would urge listeners that if there are people in your life that have made an influence on you, reach out to them, let them know, because it feels good to tell them. And I'm sure it feels good to hear at the same time.
Yeah. One thing I know that you said after we cut and got to this point was like they had brought things up that you hadn't remembered. And so even though they made such an impact on your life, when you have that conversation, like you're saying, then it'll be tenfold, because they're going to remind you of things that you didn't remember.
It's another reason to reach out and have a chat. So you listeners, you may recognize that we're on episode 20 of season 2, which is the length of our season. But guess what? This is not going to be our last episode this season. We have one more bonus episode, and I won't leave you hanging. On our next episode next week, Kirby and I are going to do an old school episode like we did in season 1, where it's just the two of us, and we'll give you all the greatest updates on everything that we're working on, the book, speaking, everything. So I hope you join us. I'm really excited to share that all with you.
Can't wait.
And of course, even though we're getting to the end, please still like and subscribe and give us an honest review. It does wonders for us and allows this show to reach more people. Thank you very, very much. And we'll see you next week for the last episode of season 2. Goodbye. Hey, listeners of the podcast, I have a special deal for you. You can now pre-order my book, Time Freedom, if you go to the link timefreedombook.com. And my special is, normally, if you order 3 books, you can get the audiobook free immediately. If you put the promo code podcast, you can order 1 book at your favorite retailer, Amazon, bookshop.org, Barnes & Noble, wherever, and put your order number in the form, put the promo code podcast, and I'll immediately send you the audiobook for free right away. So you don't have to wait. Pre-order the hard copy book, get the audiobook free. Thank you so much for your support. timefreedombook.com.